Why is it necessary that we learn to better connect with our military service members? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guest today is Shelly Rood. And from being overseas and leading covert intelligence briefings to orchestrating security programs for nearly 4,000 soldiers, Shelly knows firsthand what it means to protect and care for others. Through others over self, and Shelly and her team are dedicated to providing trainings that connect people through their shared life experiences and deepening their interpersonal skills while celebrating our nation's heroes. We're going to talk about that here today, some of the programs that she has, not only for military service members, but those that want to support and serve their service members in their community. So Shelly, welcome to Leaders of Transformation. We're glad that you're here.
Nicole, it's an honor to be here. And I'm intrigued that you called me a difference maker. That's a big title to have.
You are. There is a ripple of impact from all that you do. And we're just honored to have you here today. Before we dive in any further, I do want to do a shout out to the team at Interview Valet. They have been supplying our show with amazing guests over the years. And Tom and Karen and their team were fantastic. And they introduced us to Shelly. So a shout out to them. Thank you so much for your continued support. And one more thing before we dive into our conversation here today. This podcast is brought to you by my coaching and training company, which is the Leaders of Transformation. And so if you are a leader who wants to be better, do better, or make a greater impact in the world, and you're looking for ways to, what do you need to know? What do you need to do that? Then you can book a free consultation with me. You can go to leadersoftransformation.com/coaching. And there's some information about the coaching that I provide and services. But also there is a link to a free consultation that you can take advantage of. And so I encourage you to do that if you, again, are a leader who wants to be better, do better, and make a greater impact in the world. All right, with that, enough of the commercials. Let's get into it. Shelly, talk to us about your experience getting into the military, what inspired you to join the military, and where did it all start for you?
That's a great question. Growing up, I don't have family members in the military. Joining the military or the police force, it does tend to be something that you do because you know somebody in there or someone in your family. It's a tradition. And I did not. I actually didn't realize that anyone in my family had served in the military until after I joined. And then all of a sudden, I learned that both of my grandfathers had, but they were not proud of their service time, or it was something that did not define them for the majority of their life. And we'll talk about that more later on, but it's so interesting to me that there was a quietness around service time. And we still see that today with many of our service members. So when I was in college, I went to Western Michigan University, and I had the privilege of being on the rifle team. I ended up being the captain of the 22 small bore competitive rifle team. And being on that rifle team, it's run by the ROTC program. So I was just a civilian, just a young college student who fell in love with shooting. And I got to hang out with the ROTC kids because they were on the shooting team as well. And then in my other world, I actually joined a sorority because I did not have very many female friends growing up. And my father encouraged me to make more female friends. So I saw the juxtaposition between sorority life and the ROTC life. And I'm not going to put down sororities. I'll just share you my personal life experience is that they were very, very different. And what I saw out of the ROTC kids was a life of values. They would stand up and say truth, honor, loyalty, selfless service. And they didn't spend they spent some of their time, but not all of their time was spent at the bars or drinking or just kind of wasting time in my mindset. They had something bigger. They had a mission. And that's what really, really attracted me to joining the military. And sure enough, I was in college when 9/11 happened. And that absolutely was a defining moment for me.
So we talk a lot about defining moments on this show, actually. And so when you say that was defining moment, is that the catalyst that caused you to just say, okay, I'm going to I'm going to enlist now? Or what was the decision that you made in that moment?
Well, now you're going to learn how naive and young I was. Because when those planes hit, I remember getting in the elevator and a young lady rushing in, and she said, "Oh my goodness, the planes just hit the World Trade Center. I can't believe it. It's a terrorist attack." And I looked at her and said, "What's the World Trade Center?" So I've come a long way from that, right? So very naive, very young, just starting out in college. And now I'm celebrating a 16 Army Reserve career as an intelligence officer. So yes, we've definitely learned a lot along the way. And once I came to understand what the World Trade Center was, what a terrorist attack on their homeland actually looked like, what it felt like to be a part of that movement as a young woman made a significant impact. And absolutely, I signed my name on that bottom line to enlist.
It's funny that you say there about not knowing what the World Trade Center is. If it's not in the news, if it's not, like, how would you know? How would you know? So to be fair, I think there's a lot of young people that don't know. And I know that even for myself, I grew up in Canada, so a little bit of a different experience, but I didn't know about all these things until some world event happens. Now I think it's different now. I think because there's so much going on in the world that we're much more aware, thankfully. It could be good, could be bad.
We didn't even have internet like we do now. I don't want to date myself too bad, but cell phones were really just starting to come on the scene, and pagers were still a very big thing. And I remember having my very first email account. So yes, things are definitely much more open when it comes to the information world of today than it was, now we're looking at 16, 18 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, because there's the good side of that, and there's also the downside of that, and the pressure that can create, and so forth. So we'll get into that in a moment. But before we do that, give us a little bit more of the background, your experience in the military, what branch you served in, what was your job, and I understand you're now a chaplain. So kind of tell us that progression for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really fun progression, right? So I like to call her Army Shelly. And I definitely spent my young years in my 20s being a little wild, a little reckless, and just kind of enjoying the military life and celebrating what it means to serve my country, to be the most in shape that you've ever been, to just really love what you're doing and how you're doing it. So I did serve primarily in a reserve career with some active duty time. And I was a distinguished military graduate from Western Michigan, which meant that I got to choose my branch. And I didn't know what the branches were. So I really leaned on my counterparts to kind of teach me and sway me one way or the other. And I grew up working construction, so I was very intrigued with engineering. But I was swayed to go into intelligence. So I did choose the branch of intelligence, and I did serve in that branch for 16 years. Now, towards the end of my career, I always say that I learned too much. I grew up living over a decade in the intelligence world, in the military, and I was actually married to my ex-husband now, and he was active duty military infantry. He served with the 82nd and some other very, very, if you will, hardcore military units, deployed multiple times. And so within our inside nebula, we saw a lot of the ups and downs of what true military family life looks like. And it did result in divorce. So I'm sure we'll go through more and more details as our conversation unfolds today, just to share with you that the military lifestyle is very Sparta. Very, very Sparta. We look at Captain America on TV, and he's my absolute favorite character. And I wish that more of our soldiers and airmen, I wish that we had more Captain Americas. I truly do. And so that's what kind of led me to chaplaincy. As I ended my military career, I was not hoping to end it. I was seeking a branch transfer from Intelligence Corps into the Chaplain Corps, and paperwork issues. I hit what's called time and grade, and I was given a discharge with an option to just re-enlist. It was, of course, an honorable discharge, and all I had to do was re-enlist directly into the Chaplain Corps. Well, 4 years later, I've tried every branch. I've had every waiver request I can imagine. And now I actually don't medically qualify to re-enlist, which for me is nothing other than God's grace and God's path, because I believe that I'm a perfectly healthy young adult that can serve a need that our country has. And for some reason, right, my heart says be a military chaplain, and the military is saying no, thank you. So that's what I'm trying to figure out in life, right? How do you be a military chaplain without being in the military?
Wow. Okay, because there's so much there. So first of all, before we get into that, intelligence, that sounds so fascinating to me. And you said like my eyes were opened, I really grew up. What's sort of some of the things that you would be doing in that role as a young, person, like just full immersion into this world? What would you be doing?
So it totally depends on your rank and your background and the job within the intelligence branch that you're given. I did serve in the officer corps, so I was a 35 Delta, which is an all-source tactical intelligence officer, which basically means that I had a team. So I had imagery analysts, all different kinds of intelligence analysts. Some of them would look at the photograph and they could tell you what you were seeing in the photograph. Some of them can listen to sounds and tell you what vehicles are coming just by the way that the sounds are hitting their ears. And so there's all different types of intelligence out there. And so I would work with a team, sometimes as few as 2, sometimes as much as 6. And we would achieve whatever our commander had for us to work on. And sometimes that could look like giving reports and recommendations. One thing that we always did was analyze patrols. And so we would actually look at the death rates and the number of IEDs, for instance, that were occurring in certain areas overseas, like Iraq and Afghanistan. And so what we would do is monitor all of the data of patrols. And when I say that, I'm talking about a convoy, maybe of vehicles, but a group of people with or without vehicles that are going out into an area. We would document the time that they're leaving, the route that they took, what kind of IEDs or other types of explosives devices went off during their patrol. Did they make it back? How many of them made it back? And we would analyze all of this information and then give recommendations to the commander of how to move forward with the next patrol. So it was definitely an opportunity to never take anything off face value. And even to this day, if someone gives me a fact or gives me even just a statement or an article to read, I will never assume that it's true. To my fault, right? I'll have to have 10,000 pieces of evidence, both supporting and to the contrary, before I can actually feel like I can make a recommendation of one way or another.
So that does give us a little bit of an insight into this program that we're going to talk about in a moment here that you provide, because that means what I heard in that was that you have done your homework on this, and that you have the back the data that some of the things that, like, I know that later on we'll give a link to our listeners to read your article where you talk about how to support service members better, and some information. And there's a link actually even in there into a training that you did, which I watched. And so all of this data, is really eye-opening in terms of like what you're dealing with, the issue, because you gotta know the issue, and then what are you doing about it, which leads us to you becoming a chaplain or wanting to become a chaplain. And now, sometimes doors close and we think that's the way to go about it. And we have a lot of entrepreneurs that are listening. And I know when coaching entrepreneurs, oftentimes they'll say like, this is the way that I see it to be done. And I remember I was like that in my 20s. I was like, I God bless me here. Bless me in this little box that I put myself in. And finally he said to me, will you stop telling me where to bless you? Let me handle that. And I was like, oh. And back then I would have never imagined that I'd be doing what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
I actually fulfilled the mission and what I wanted to do. I just didn't do it where and how I thought I would do it.
And that's exactly it. It's that mission first mindset. Absolutely. If you know what the mission is, and that's one thing that is beautiful about the military. I remember being a young woman and interviewing in the civilian world for leadership positions. And I remember being on an interview with a very accomplished older man. And he said, now, young lady, don't you think that your time in the military would have you just struggling to be creative or think outside the box. And I said, sir, I don't mean to be rude, but that couldn't be any further from the truth. And he said, explain that to me. Well, in the military, they just tell you to do it. You just get it done. And so you actually do have a lot more freedom than even in the civilian world with a lot of the things that we think about. And so that is a blessing that can come from working with or being around military and veterans, is that they are very mission driven, which means that they can be more creative than a lot of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us in the civilian world, I'll be careful with this, but we're spoon fed, or we expect to be spoon fed the information, where what you're talking about is like, just do it, figure it out. And then you have to figure it out. So
God will tell you what he wants you to know eventually.
Yes. Yes. Well, I joke about it, actually. Speaking of that, I joke about the fact that I'm on a need to know basis with God. You know, I mean, he doesn't give me the whole thing. He just gives me enough to keep moving forward. It's like Abraham in the Bible when he said, come, I'll take you to another land. He said, which land? I'll let you know. Start walking and then I'll let you know.
Or like Jonah, where he's like, yeah, come on. You have a terrible place to go and you're going to be there for a while. But I'm going to be with you. I don't want to do that. Yeah, I don't want to do that. I'll run the other direction. No. Okay. So, yeah, but anyway, we digress. But let's talk about some of these issues. Like we mentioned about you studying the data and really knowing some of the backstory. So talk about some of the issues that our warriors are facing personally right now. You mentioned about suicide and depression and homelessness and some of the things that are going on. And then we can talk about some of the solutions that you've created for that. Yeah, absolutely. So when we think of the term veteran, sometimes it can be very easy to stereotype that. And there's a lot that actually goes into the word veteran. And if you want to know what veteran means, my answer to that question is, well, why do you want to know the answer? Because if you're going to attach the word veteran to benefits, like health benefits, education benefits, if you're going to attach the word veteran to a dollar sign, then you're going to get the federal government's definition of a veteran. And what you may not know is that veteran from the federal government, if you served in the National Guard, for instance, or in the Army Reserves, and you did not do 180 days of consecutive active duty time on active training orders, then you technically are not considered a veteran. So you could be somebody like myself who served 16 years. You could serve a full 24 years in the Army Reserves or National Guard, and you can get out and you can be like, all right, I'm ready for my veteran status, right? And you're going to turn your paperwork in and they're going to say, you're not a veteran.
Wow.
What? Excuse me? It is kind of, it's not a secret, but it's something that we don't really think about when we're in the veteran care space. And so I appreciate today's discussion just to have the opportunity to shed some light on this, the statistic of the number of percentage of veterans that actually qualify for medical care through the VA, which is the Veterans Administration, is 60%, 60%. So, I mean, that's shocking, right? That's very low than what most people would think.
Well, and that brings up, because I was going to ask you about that. You mentioned that in your article, which was fascinating to me, because and when you think of, like, even you mentioned 60%, and then only half of those
actually utilize the services.
It's crazy. Mm-hmm. So why? So let's dive into that. Why is that? What's going on? What is most needed? Why are they not getting the care, other than the fact that some of them are not actually qualifying, but even those that do are not actually taking advantage of it?
Yeah, so there's red tape everywhere. There really is. And even in conversation, there's a lot of red tape. And I have the absolute pleasure of working with an organization that is grant funded through SAMHSA, which is a mental health nationwide. And these funds are given directly to the state of Michigan, and they are to feed and serve our veterans at a grassroots level. So with this pocket of government dollars, I'm not required to be stuck with that definition of veteran. So in our programs, we are actually servicing what we define as a veteran, which to us is anyone who even served one day in service. If you went to boot camp and walked off the step of the bus and twisted your ankle, you have that title of veteran and you can get care through us. And that's a true story, by the way. We have too many people playing video games and not enough strength in our ankles these days. And so, really digging into that definition of veteran and how we can care for it. And, today's conversation is really meant to be around the world of mental wellness. It's meant to be around the world of mental health. What I love about what I'm seeing in the world right now is this welcoming of these phrases. Now it's normal, right? We're normalizing what it means to actually talk about mental wellness, to talk about resiliency, to talk about anxiety and talk about depression, because these are the triggers where if we are not careful, they do very easily slip into thoughts of suicide. And death by suicide is a very serious topic, especially amongst our veteran population. If you don't know the very popular statistic, it's 22 a day. That's the number of veterans that take their own life. Now that statistic sadly has not changed for many, many years. And what we're starting to see for the very first time here after COVID is what we're seeing is actually an increase in thoughts of suicidal ideation and a decrease in following through with the action. Now that's almost a beautiful thing, right? Because it means that hopefully what it means is that we're not as cautious to reach out and to share with someone that we're battling dark inner thoughts. So if we can talk and connect with others, then we know for a fact that meaningful conversation, meaningful peer connection is clinically proven to stop and reduce suicide actions. And that really is what it's all about.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there, because I wanted you to talk about that. And that is why we're doing this, talking about how can we serve our service members better. And part of that is in how we interact with them through the programs that are available, like your program, but also even as a civilian. And so talk about some of the things that we can do. And I know that also you mentioned in that article about military families, even like the disconnect that happens within there. So when you're talking about having meaningful interactions and the benefit of having meaningful interactions to reduce some of the disconnect and have them feel like they're actually being valued and cared for. Talk a little bit about how we can actually do that.
It really does come down to conversation. One thing that I really want us to think about today is how often are we using the phrase, thank you for your service? Now, I have been in uniform and I've had somebody walk by and spit on me. So let me just say that if you use the words for thank you for your service, like already high five, okay, you're doing a good job. I don't want to sway anyone or scare you away from using that phrase. It's just that the phrase thank you for your service can be very surfacey.
Yeah.
And so next time, you're tempted to use that phrase, I just want to encourage you to actually take a time out and set aside 5 minutes and have a meaningful conversation with the person that you're trying to thank, right? Because if you really want to honor somebody, you give them more than a sentence of your time. That statement, thank you for your service. I mean, I've had somebody shout it out to me in the grocery store 4 aisles away, right? That's not about me. You're not honoring me, you're embarrassing me. Maybe you're making yourself feel better, right? And so just really being cautious about how and why we're doing this. And there are 4 ways that you can have a meaningful connection and have that meaningful conversation with somebody who you believe may be a military member. And it doesn't have to take longer than 5 minutes. I like to share that I had a gentleman at one point when I was traveling in uniform and I was flying. He came up to me and he said, ma'am, I know you don't know me and I know you think I'm totally creepy. I don't know what to say other than here's my phone number. If you ever need anything, I don't know why you would ever call me, but here's my phone number and I want you to know that I'm here for you. And yes, it was a super creepy moment and I put that phone number in my pocket and I was very young. But you know what? A couple of weeks later, when I pulled that pair of uniform pants out and was throwing them through the wash, I found that number. And to this day, it has an impact on my heart. And I do want to really encourage taking that extra step, because when we feel like nobody cares about us or nobody's thinking about us, that's when we go to that dark place. And it's very easy for the devil to step in and just repeat and poke and prod and deepen those thoughts even more.
Well, and I can imagine also because you are sacrificing your life for and your time and so much more for others. And if we don't acknowledge, or we do that kind of like you said, the surface response, it is actually, I would imagine, even worse, right? Because it's so disconnected from the actual commitment that you're like, it's not even close to the commitment that you're putting out. So
and
yeah.
So think about this. We don't all join the military for the same reason.
Yeah.
So that is an excellent way to start that conversation, is just to say, hey, can I ask you a question? Why did you join? And don't assume that you know the answer. Don't ever assume that you know why somebody joined. I have a very dear friend of mine who's a fighter pilot, and she joined on a bet. That's an amazing story. Don't you want to hear that story? If you ask the question, then you get to be a part of that very personal, cool story. And taking the time to just step back and ask them, why did you join? And there's this assumption also that many of us join out of patriotism, out of love for country. And yes, there are a lot of us that do that. There's also a lot of us who joined for the benefits, who joined because we needed money, who joined because we were homeless. And if that answer to the question, why did you join, is a very deep, personal, and almost shameful answer to us, right? If we haven't healed or come to peace with the reason of why we joined, then you saying that surface phrase of thank you for your service actually can bring out feelings of guilt and negativity. And so what we're doing is we're stepping into a situation, attempting to honor a person in uniform. And what we're doing is unintentionally creating a negative space for them, which is the opposite of what we were trying to do.
Got it.
Take the time to dig just a little bit deeper and start with, why did you join?
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the things not to do, which I thought was really interesting, is like, don't go, oh, I meant to, to join and I never did, or I wished I had, or give us a little bit of a taste of some of these things. Like, don't say that. I mean, you alluded to it, but there's some other ones too, right? Or like, my brother's cousin's mother's father, blah, blah. And you're sitting there eating lunch and you're like, so when you talk about, just because you mentioned about the 5 minutes or 4 or 5 minutes to take a few, minutes, but also just like you would with anyone else, don't just interrupt what they're doing, respect their privacy, I guess is where I'm getting at too. It's not just about, hey, just because they're, in the military, that they're just open for you to just have
and
this
we feel that way when you wear a uniform, you're a representation of your country. And so we are public figures. When we're stuck in uniform out in public, we have to eat. So if we're out eating lunch, I love that you want to come up and, maybe honor us or recognize us. That's wonderful. But don't trap me for 10 minutes telling me about your family's history of how they served in the military. I just want to eat my cold French fries and go back to the office. So, what to stay away from? We're talking about first time engagement with a military person that you don't have an established relationship with. So do you remember your grandma ever telling you, like, don't pry into somebody's personal life? Well, the military loves acronyms. So we're going to stick with PRY. Here's the 3 things that you don't talk about. You don't talk about politics, you don't talk about religion, and you don't talk about yourself. And that's really that last one that you're talking about, is when you're going to approach and talk to somebody in the military, focusing on yourself really is a big no-no. If you come up to us and you say, I almost joined, or I was going to join, but you just ruined it. I mean, you really did, because there's something inside of us that's immediately going, oh yeah, cool story, bro. Well, I did. And now it's very difficult to get over that conversational hump, right? We're talking about a first time interaction. Now, if this is somebody that you've known or interacted with a few times, and you feel like you want to have a deeper connection and talk about why you decided not to join or why you couldn't join and they did, then that's appropriate later on, but not in a first time interaction.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about those meaningful interactions a little bit further in terms of the depth of it. You tell us about your program and tell us what it's designed to do, and who it's for, and how we can again, coming back to that primary question, How can we learn better to connect? You've given us some great tools here. I know you have some practical opportunities as well for us to take advantage of so that we can be better at this when we get beyond the initial to go into that deeper conversation.
So we are looking through the lens of mental wellness today, and it starts with conversation. And so this program is called Warriors with Warriors. And what we're doing is connecting our spiritual warriors with our earthly warriors. So this is not a program that is meant to speak directly to the veteran or the military person. This is a program that actually speaks to civilians. And in the scope of the civilian world, I'm talking to the faith leaders. I'm talking to people of faith, right? So let's define that. If you are a pastor, preacher, deacon, Bible study leader, whatever religious title you think you have or don't have, if you are a person who is deeply convicted in your faith, and I'm talking all denominations, right? So the chaplain represents the spirit of the human being, regardless of actual belief system. So if you consider yourself a person of faith, then that's who this program is designed for. And even though I am a Christian chaplain, I do speak to the spirit of everyone. So if you have that hope and that belief in the deeper inner spirituality of humanity, this program is for you. And so what we're doing is we're teaching people of faith how to interact with military people. The statistics show that when a military person is connected to an organization of faith, whether it's a church or a nonprofit, their mental health rates are so much better, and the suicide numbers are very, very, very low. So there is a genuine opportunity here for our people of faith to refine our conversations, to deepen those connections, and you will save life. It's not a matter of, oh, is this going to make a difference? I'm telling you that I walk this walk every single day. I get phone calls every single day of somebody who's hanging on the edge. What you say and how you say it makes a difference. So reaching out to our people of faith, what we do is teach 2 different training modules. The first is called Military Cultural Competency, and that's all about the military. We've done a great job showcasing today what that looks like. What branch did you serve in? What was your job? Why did you join? Getting to know there's 6 branches in the military now. If you want to call the Coast Guard a branch, somebody's laughing out there. But you should know what all of the branches are. And if you don't, that's perfectly okay. And not being afraid to ask the questions, to be a little more intelligent about what the military means. And I know, right? I mean, I was a young girl too, and I had no idea what the military was, and I hated history. And here I am, former intelligence officer now. So you can learn, you just have to have a little bit of human interest in you. And it's not hard. It's not hard. It just starts with a good heart and a little bit of curiosity. And so that's what Warriors with Warriors is designed to do. We teach 2 main things. We teach military cultural competency, and the other piece is crisis awareness and crisis intervention. So what that means is looking for the signs and symptoms of when somebody is facing a mental health battle. And that can be anywhere from depression to suicide to anxiety. There's a lot of mental issues that we talk with on a daily basis. And that kind of brings us to our definition of the second group of people, which is military people. We already redefined the word veteran for our listeners here today. And so, Nicole, when you hear the phrase military person, I'd like to define that for you as well. We're talking about an active service member. We're talking about a reservist. Yes, maybe they're in the National Guard. Maybe they are a family member. So either they're the children of a person who was in those first 3 categories, or they have an aunt, an uncle, a niece, a nephew. Those are all military people. So hopefully what we've done is we've taken the definition of person of faith and expanded it, and taken the definition of military person and expanded it. And those are the 2 groups that we're trying to bring together because they do make a tangible difference.
So how did you come up with this program? I mean, I know you had some grant funding and so forth, but how did you come up with this? How did you go from, just as I know we're wrapping up here soon here, but I thought this transition, even for those entrepreneurs, the startups, because this is a startup, how you went from, I'm trying to get a job over here. Hello, people, I want to make a difference, to coming up with this program. And maybe some of the people that are also alongside you have developed this program as well.
Absolutely. So the best thing that I can tell you for anyone in the business space is you have to go back to your passion. You have to go back to your roots, and you have to own that. And don't be afraid to dig into that and define yourself as that. And God will put the right people alongside of you and in front of you and behind you to see it to fruition. So remember my dream of being a military chaplain? That wasn't going to happen. But now here I am, and I graduated seminary, and I'm an ordained minister, and I can't get back into the military. So what do? I just start serving through my own company. I figure out a way to just tell the world, hey, I love military people. Does anybody else love military people? Who wants to walk this path with me? And what I love to say is that this program was not my idea. There's a gentleman out there named Chaplain Brian Webb, and he's been an incredibly spiritual mentor for me over the last few years. And I recognize that he was given the opportunity to have this faith program. He knew that there was a mission here, and he knew it would make a difference. And when I learned of it, I said, sir, I'll volunteer for the program. I'll do anything you want. Just involve me. And so after a couple of years of kind of watching him and begging him to be involved, he did turn it over into my hands last year. So this is my second year executing this program. We have trained, about 165 people of faith at this point, and they have actual certifications. And it's just been such an amazing thing to see it grow and grow and grow. And the more that we talk about it, it's so exciting. So one of the things that we just did is we had our summit for the year. And, we could have it in a conference room, and we could bring a bunch of faith people in and put some slides up. No, we had it at the air show. So we brought in 100 hand-chosen faith leaders from the area, and we had military people and veterans on site. And it was an entire day of networking and interaction. And they had a quiz where they walked around and asked, what was your branch when you served? Why did you join? And it was perfect military cultural competency in action. And that's the type of real world action that I want to see. I want to see it in hand from my summit. I want to see it coming out of every workshop that we do. And I want to see it, Nicole, from your audience. I genuinely want the Leaders of Transformation audience to go out there and to put in action these steps. I want them to find a military person and be brave enough to spend 5 minutes and say, what was your branch? What was your job? Why did you join? And most importantly, how can I serve you?
So good. Shelly, thank you so much. Oh my gosh. I can feel your passion. And I know I was going to ask you what your mission is, but I heard it in that, it's to continue on with this. Do you have a specific goal in mind you mentioned about, of course, being very mission driven. Do you have something specific in mind? I don't want to assume as to what it looks like, in the next few years.
That's a great question. So I am a business owner. This is not my business. This is one program that we run in our business. And for our business, we teach the leadership mindset of others over self. So my big picture, what I would love to see is just more embracing of this leadership mindset so that we're all out there connecting with other people. I think that the way that we can make a difference is not to change others, it's to change ourselves.
Yes.
And that is the hardest thing to do, isn't it? It's so easier to point the finger out.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And we talk about leaders of transformation, and, it is leaders who are creating transformation in the world. But in order to be a leader who creates transformation, you first get to create the transformation within yourself. You get to be a leader of yourself. Leadership begins right with us, and then it spills out. And I find that it's interesting. There's so many people that, say, I want to be a leader. I want to be an influencer. And, it's the real leaders and real influencers don't actually go out there and say, I want to influence a whole bunch of people. They just go and influence, like they just, they do it for themselves. They embody it. And then people start to follow. So
remember we talked about Army Shelly? She was a mess, right? We have Army Shelly in her 20s, very selfish, very crazy. And now you have Chaplain Shelly, who's in her late 30s. And, and I grew up. I went through a spiritual transformation, and I grew up and I learned how and why we do things and the impact that we truly can have on others. And that's the decision that I made. And I'm really hoping that a lot of our listeners can make that decision as well. And I want to serve you so that you don't feel empty-handed trying to make this difference, we did put together a landing page specific for leaders of transformation. And so if you go to othersoverself.com/LOT, that's othersoverself.com/LOT, then you'll find a landing page just for you, and it'll have a download button where you can read that full 21-page article and find some of the other resources that we talked about today.
Beautiful. Shelly, thank you so much. I appreciate you and appreciate the fact that you just alluded to it as well, as that this comes from your own personal experience and understanding, because who better to help someone go through something, transformation, than somebody who's actually gone through that themselves. And so we didn't talk much about your story and that, but you alluded to it there. And that's a really important aspect of it to know. And that's right. That's drive. When we think about mission, people that are mission driven, that are purpose driven, there's an underlining fuel that keeps it going, keeps the flame going, and it often does come from our own experience, personal experience, or having experienced it with the people that are around us. So I encourage our listeners to go to othersoverself.com/LOT. Thank you for putting that special landing page together for us. And I would encourage our listeners, because I say leaders of transformation, take action. So take action, go there, download that free article. It's not complicated. You don't have to enter your email, whatever, just get the information. And I love that Shelly just wants to give that information away. And then find out more about these programs that Shelly is offering and her team is offering, so that you can learn more about how to support our military and make a greater impact in the world.
Because truly, every conversation makes a difference. Truly.
Yes. And actually, we started off with that even before we even started recording, talking about our words matter. What we do and say matters. So if you have a doubt about that what you say and do matters, let me just dispel that right here. It matters. It matters what you say to the person that you see at the restaurant, at the fast food counter, or what. It matters, and I love what you said, Shelly, about, do we think that it makes a difference if faith-based leaders, reach out, and that there's a community around people, the facts, the data proves it.
I do.
It matters.
Yeah. And if you needed some justification, right, you have to remember this is a federal mental health grant that sees the value in what we're doing. It's real.
Yeah.
You have an opportunity to make a real difference just in 5 minutes. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you, Shelly. Really appreciate you. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We hope this has benefited you. And we look forward to hearing some of those stories. As you say, I went out and I started engaging in a conversation, and this is what happened. We'd love to hear your stories. So you can go on leadersoftransformation.com. Of course, you can reach out to Shelly and her team directly and share the testimonies with them as well. You can also find us on social. We'd love to hear how this is impacting you. And we, again, thank you for being here today. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.